The bride wore pearl white, but her husband wore indifference like a second skin. Seraphine Ashford stood at the altar of the great cathedral, the weight of her ivory gown pulling at her shoulders, and felt the eyes of 300 strangers pressing against her back. Candles flickered. Organ music drifted into silence. And beside her, tall and motionless, the Duke of Ashford stared at the stained glass window above the bishop's head, as if he were already counting the minutes until it was over. His name was Lucian. She had whispered it to herself 100 times since the engagement was announced, each syllable a small, private hope. She had imagined the way his mouth might soften when he finally said hers. She had imagined a great many things during those 3 feverish weeks of preparation. None of them were true. When the bishop asked him to speak his vows, the Duke's voice was low and perfectly even. He did not look at her. He spoke the words into the air, and then he slid the ring onto her finger with the detached efficiency of a man signing a business contract. The gold was cold. So were his hands. Seraphine's own voice shook as she made her promises. She meant every one. She had meant them since she was 7 years old. But the man beside her did not remember. When the ceremony ended and he offered his arm to lead her back down the aisle, she rested her gloved hand in the crook of his elbow and searched his face for any flicker of warmth. His jaw was clean-shaven and sharp. His eyes, a startling shade of gray, stared straight ahead. He looked like a marble statue that had been forced to attend a wedding. The carriage ride to Ashford Hall took 2 hours. He did not speak a single word. She watched the countryside roll past, green fields dissolving into fog, and pressed her palm against the hidden locket beneath her bodice. She had worn it every day for 10 years. Inside was a tiny pressed forget-me-not, brittle and blue as a faded bruise. He had given it to her by the lake. He had said, "I will marry you one day, little star. No matter what happens, I will find you." But he had not found her. Circumstance and duty had pushed them together, and the boy who made that promise had vanished somewhere inside the man who now sat beside her, silent as stone. She told herself it would change once they arrived. She told herself he was simply nervous or proud or unaccustomed to showing feeling. She told herself she would be patient. She had waited 10 years. She could wait a little longer. Ashford Hall rose out of the twilight like a castle from an old legend, all towers and ivy and glowing windows. The staff lined the entrance to greet their new duchess. Seraphine smiled at each one, learning names, offering quiet thanks. The housekeeper's eyes were kind. The butler bowed with genuine respect. For a brief, fragile moment she felt something close to hope. Then her husband handed his gloves to a footman and said, without turning around, "You will occupy the east wing. I have arranged for your belongings to be taken there. Dinner is served at 8 if you wish to join me." He walked away before she could answer. The east wing was beautiful and utterly silent. Her bedroom was draped in lavender silk, with tall windows overlooking the rose garden. A fire crackled in the grate. It was the most exquisite room she had ever seen, and it felt like a cage. She did not cry. She had learned long ago that tears did not bring back the dead, did not mend a father's debts, and did not make a cold husband warm. She unpinned her veil, let her dark hair fall past her shoulders, and touched the locket one more time. Then she washed her face, put on a gown of soft gray, and went down to dinner. The dining table could seat 40. They sat at opposite ends, 2 small figures in a sea of polished mahogany. Candlelight flickered between them. Footsteps echoed. She lifted her spoon and said very gently, "The gardens are lovely. I walked through them this afternoon." He glanced up as if surprised she had spoken. "Yes. My mother designed them. I would like to know more about her if you ever wish to speak of it." Something flickered in his gray eyes there and then gone. He returned his attention to his plate. "There is little to tell. She died when I was a boy. I am sorry." He did not respond. The silence stretched, thick and heavy as velvet. She tried again. "Perhaps tomorrow we might take tea together. I would like to learn about the estate and about you." He set down his fork with a quiet clink. "I am occupied tomorrow. Mr. Hale, the land steward, can answer any questions you have about the estate." "I was not asking about the estate." The words hung in the air. He looked at her then, truly looked at her, as if seeing her for the first time since the wedding. His gaze was sharp, searching, almost uncomfortable. Then he stood. "I have ledgers to review. Good evening." She sat alone at the enormous table, listening to his footsteps retreat down the marble corridor, and felt the hope she had nurtured for 10 years begin to splinter at the edges. The days that followed were a study in quiet heartbreak. He was not unkind. He was never cruel, never sharp. He simply was not there. He rose early, worked late, and treated her with the distant courtesy one might offer a visiting dignitary. She wandered the great house alone, trailing her fingers over ancient tapestries, speaking softly to the servants, learning the rhythm of a place that did not yet feel like home. She learned other things too. She learned that the Duke had inherited his title at 12, after his parents drowned in a boating accident on Silver Lake. The tragedy had shaped him, closed him off, forged him into a man who trusted no one and felt nothing he could not control. The staff spoke of him with respect and a kind of protective sadness. He was a good master, they said. A fair one, just not a warm one. Seraphine understood loss. Her own mother had died when she was young, and her father, a gentle but impractical man, had slowly gambled away their fortune. When the Duke of Ashford's solicitor had arrived with an offer of marriage and a promise to settle all debts, it had felt like a miracle. She had not told her father the real reason she accepted. She had not told anyone. She had only pressed her hand to the locket and whispered, "I am coming, my lake boy, I am finally coming." But the lake boy was gone. 3 weeks after the wedding, she found the portrait gallery. It was a long, shadowed corridor lined with gilded frames, each one holding the face of a long-dead Ashford. She walked slowly, studying jawlines and eye colors, tracing the family resemblance down through the centuries. Near the end of the hall, she stopped. It was him. A boy of perhaps 9, with wind-tousled dark hair and a grin that cracked his whole face open. He was sitting on a stone bench beside a lake she recognized instantly. Silver Lake. The water sparkled behind him, and in his hand he held a small silver chain. A locket, the locket. Her breath caught, her knees went weak. She sank onto a velvet-covered bench and stared at the painting, her heart hammering so hard she could feel it in her throat. He had been so happy then. So open, so bright, so full of light. What had happened to that boy? She knew the answer, of course. The accident. The drowning. The parents who went into the water and never came out. But knowing did not make the loss any easier to bear. She reached up and touched the hidden chain around her neck. "I remember," she whispered to the painted boy. "I remember everything." And she made a decision. She would not beg for his love. She would not chase a man who did not want to be caught. But she would also not abandon the promise she had carried for half her life. She would become the kind of duchess this house deserved. She would tend his lands, care for his people, and stand quietly at his side. And perhaps, if fate was kind, the boy in the painting would one day look out through the eyes of the cold Duke and see her. Perhaps. Lady Celeste de Lacroix arrived on a Thursday afternoon, bringing with her the scent of French perfume and the easy confidence of a woman who had never been made to feel unwelcome. Seraphine was in the drawing room, reviewing household accounts with Mrs. Pemberton, the housekeeper, when the door opened and the Duke walked in. On his arm was a vision of honey-colored hair and laughing green eyes, dressed in a riding habit of emerald velvet. "Celeste will be staying with us for a few weeks," the Duke announced. "Her father's estate is undergoing repairs. I trust the blue suite can be prepared." It was not a question. Seraphine rose, smoothing her gray day dress, and offered a warm smile. "Of course, I will see to it personally. Welcome, Lady Celeste." The woman's smile was dazzling and perfectly polite, but her eyes swept over Seraphine with a swift, assessing glance that missed nothing. "How kind you are, Your Grace. Lucien has told me so little about you. I confess I am desperately curious." Lucien. The name slipped off her tongue like silk. Seraphine felt a small, sharp twinge beneath her ribs. She smiled through it. "There is not much to tell," she said lightly. "I am still learning my way." Celeste laughed, a musical sound. "Oh, you shall learn quickly, I am sure. Lucien can be a difficult tutor, but he is worth the effort." She touched the Duke's sleeve with a familiarity that spoke of years of friendship, or perhaps something more. The Duke did not pull away. He did not even seem to notice. He simply nodded and said, "I will leave you two to become acquainted. I have matters to attend." He was gone before Seraphine could draw breath. Celeste lowered herself onto a settee and arranged her skirts with practiced grace. "Poor Lucien, he works too hard. I have been telling him for years he needs more laughter in his life. Perhaps you will be the one to provide it." There was nothing unkind in her tone, and yet Seraphine felt the sting of implication. She took a seat across from her guest and folded her hands. "I hope to try." Celeste tilted her head, studying her. "You have a very serene face, Your Grace. I imagine you are a patient woman. That will serve you well here." Seraphine did not know if it was a compliment or a warning. She chose to hear the former. "Thank you." Over the following days, she had ample opportunity to observe the bond between the Duke and Lady Celeste. They rode together in the mornings, their laughter drifting up to the windows. They shared inside references at dinner that left Seraphine smiling blankly. They played chess in the library until late, their murmured conversation seeping under the closed door. Seraphine told herself it did not matter. Friendship was not a threat, but the ache in her chest grew heavier with each passing hour. She began taking long walks alone, finding solace in the gardens and the village beyond. She visited tenants, brought baskets to the sick, and listened to the quiet stories of ordinary people who had no idea they were speaking to a duchess. They called her the kind lady and pressed flowers into her hands. She did not realize the Duke was watching. At first he did not understand why he kept glancing toward the window. It was a Tuesday. He was in his study, reviewing crop rotation reports with Mr. Hale, the young land steward. The man was competent, thorough, and irritatingly cheerful. He was also, at that precise moment, looking out the window with an expression of undisguised admiration. "The Duchess is remarkable," Hale said, almost to himself. "She spent the entire morning with the Miller family. Their youngest has a fever. She sat with the child for hours, cooling his brow. The villagers are already devoted to her." The Duke looked up sharply. Through the glass he could see a slender figure in a pale blue dress crossing the lawn, a basket swinging from her arm. She moved with a quiet grace, her dark hair catching the light. She was smiling at something a gardener had said. The gardener was smiling back. Something hot and unfamiliar twisted in the Duke's chest. "She is the Duchess," he said flatly. "She has duties." Hale blinked at the cold tone. "Yes, Your Grace, of course." The Duke returned his gaze to the papers, but the numbers blurred. He could still see her smile. She never smiled at him like that. She had at the beginning offered him tentative, hopeful smiles. He had been too busy, too distant, too wrapped in his own guarded silence to accept them. Eventually she had stopped offering. He had not noticed the moment she stopped. But now, suddenly, he felt the absence like a missing heartbeat. That evening he found himself watching her across the dinner table. She was speaking with Celeste about the village school, her voice soft and earnest. She did not look at him once. When she laughed at something Celeste said, the sound was lovely and fleeting, and it cut him in a place he could not name. After the meal she excused herself early. "I am a little tired. I think I will retire." He stood, as courtesy demanded, but she did not glance his way. She simply walked out of the dining room, her steps light and unhurried, and disappeared into the shadowed corridor. Celeste raised an eyebrow. "She is a gentle soul, your Duchess. You are fortunate." He did not answer. He was staring at the empty doorway, feeling the strange, unfamiliar weight of loss. Days turned into weeks. Celeste departed, leaving behind a lingering cloud of French perfume and a knowing smile. The house settled back into its quiet routine, but something had shifted. Seraphine no longer sought him out. She no longer waited in the morning room hoping he might join her for breakfast. She no longer suggested walks or asked questions about his day. She filled her hours with the estate, the village, the gardens. She had carved out a life that did not include him, and she seemed, for the first time, almost content. He should have been relieved. He had married her out of obligation, a cold transaction to settle a debt his father had owed her family. He had never wanted a wife cluttering his solitude, demanding attention he did not know how to give. She was doing exactly what he had hoped, so why did it feel like a wound? He began watching her more closely. He noticed the way she hummed under her breath when she arranged flowers, the way she paused to touch the petals of the roses in the garden, her fingertips so gentle, the way she talked to the servants as if they were her equals, learning their children's names, remembering their troubles. He noticed, too, the way Mr. Hale looked at her. The young steward was always finding excuses to seek her opinion. A question about the tenant cottages, a request for her thoughts on the new drainage plan. He spoke to her with an openness that the Duke had never managed, and she responded with a warmth that made the Duke's jaw clench. One afternoon he came upon them in the orangery. Hale was showing her a sapling lemon tree, his hand near hers on the clay pot. She was laughing, the sound bright and unguarded. Something cracked inside the Duke's chest, something sharp and possessive and utterly unreasonable. He turned and walked away before either of them saw him. That night he dreamed of drowning. He was a boy again, standing on the shore of Silver Lake, watching a small boat tip and vanish beneath dark water. He heard screaming. He heard his own voice, raw and desperate. And then, cutting through the chaos, a softer voice, a girl's voice. "Don't forget me. Promise you won't forget me." He woke with a gasp, his sheets tangled, his skin slick with sweat. The dream faded quickly, as it always did, leaving behind only a hollow ache and a single fragmented image, a chain of silver. A tiny blue flower. He did not know why it mattered. He only knew that it hurt. The turning point came on a gray November morning, when word reached the hall that fever had broken out in the lower village. Seraphine did not hesitate. She gathered herbs and clean linens, summoned the housekeeper, and set out in the carriage before the Duke had finished his breakfast. He was informed of her departure by a nervous footman. "The Duchess has gone to nurse the sick, Your Grace. She said she would not return until the crisis passed." His coffee cup hit the saucer with a crack. "She did what?" "She insisted, Your Grace. She took 2 maids and a basket of supplies. She said it was her duty, his duty." That was what he had told Mr. Hale. She was the Duchess, she had duties. And now she was in a fever-ridden village, surrounded by contagion, risking her life for people she barely knew. Fear hit him like a physical blow. He was on his horse before he could think, riding hard through the mist, his heart slamming against his ribs. When he reached the village, he found chaos. Cottages filled with the groaning sick, smoke from medicinal fires, and in the center of it all, Seraphine. She was kneeling beside a cot, her hair escaping its pins, her face pale with exhaustion. Her hands were red and chapped from hours of work. She was pressing a cool cloth to a child's forehead, murmuring a soft lullaby. She looked up when he appeared in the doorway. For a moment something flickered in her tired eyes, surprise, and then a careful, guarded blankness. "You should not be here, Your Grace. It is not safe." "Neither should you." His voice was rough, louder than he intended. "You are coming back to the hall immediately." She did not move. "There are people here who need me. I will not abandon them. I will send doctors, nurses, whoever is required, but you are leaving now." She rose slowly, her worn dress clinging to her frame. She faced him with a quiet dignity that made his throat tight. "With respect, I am not a servant you can order. I am your wife, and a wife has the right to choose where she is needed most." The word wife hung between them, heavy and unfamiliar. He realized with a jolt of shame that it was the first time she had claimed the title. Perhaps the first time she felt she had the right. He stared at her, breathing hard. She did not flinch. She did not plead. She simply waited, her chin lifted, her eyes full of a sadness he had put there, and he could not speak. He could not name the terror that was gnawing at his chest. He could only turn on his heel and stride back into the gray morning, leaving her behind. He sent the doctors. He sent the nurses. He sent everything he could think of, and then he paced his study like a caged animal, waiting. 3 days later, they carried her back to the hall on a stretcher. She had collapsed at dawn, her body finally surrendering to the fever she had fought so hard to cure in others. The Duke did not leave her bedside. The bedroom was dim, lit only by a single lamp and the pale glow of the fire. Seraphine lay motionless beneath the coverlet, her dark hair spread across the pillow like a spill of ink. Her cheeks were flushed with fever. Her breath came in shallow, uneven gasps. The doctor had bled her, administered tonics, and shaken his head with a grave expression. "Her body is exhausted, Your Grace. We must wait and pray." Waiting had never been the Duke's strength. He sat in the chair by her bed, still in his riding clothes, his cravat loosened and his hair disheveled. He held her hand, the one that was not tangled in the sheet, and pressed his thumb against her racing pulse. She looked so small, so fragile. He had never allowed himself to see it before. He had kept her at arm's length, a stranger in a lavender room, and now she might slip away without ever knowing. Without ever knowing what? The question terrified him. On the second night, when the fever peaked and she began to murmur in her delirium, he leaned closer, desperate to catch the words. "Promise, don't forget." Her voice was a thread, a whisper from a dream. "The lake, the flowers you promised." He went still. The lake, the flowers. The fragments from his own dream echoed back at him, and a cold shiver ran down his spine. "Seraphine," he said hoarsely. "What are you saying?" She did not answer. Her head tossed on the pillow, and as she moved, something glinted at her throat. A thin silver chain. He had noticed it before, tucked beneath her collar, but he had never asked about it. Now, with trembling fingers, he reached out and drew it gently free. The locket was small, oval, tarnished with age. He recognized it instantly. The world tilted. His vision swam. He was 8 years old again, standing on the shore of Silver Lake, his heart wide open. He was pressing a silver locket into the hand of a dark-haired girl with eyes like summer sky. He was saying, "So you won't forget me. I will marry you one day, little star. No matter what happens, I will find you." And then the water, the screaming, the cold, black silence that swallowed everything. He had buried that summer. He had buried his parents, his childhood, and the promise he made. His mind had locked it all away behind a wall of grief so thick that even the memory of her face had vanished. But she had not forgotten. She had waited. She had come to him across a decade of silence, wearing his locket against her skin, hoping he would remember. And he had treated her like a stranger. The sob that broke from his chest was raw and jagged. He pressed the locket to his lips, his shoulders shaking. "I am sorry. I am so sorry. Little star, please don't leave me. Not now, not when I have only just found you again." The fire crackled. The wind whispered against the windows. He wept without shame, holding her hand against his cheek, his tears falling onto the coverlet. Sometime before dawn, her fever broke. The first thing Seraphine saw when she opened her eyes was the Duke. He was slumped in the chair beside her bed, his head resting on his arms, his dark hair a rumpled mess. He looked exhausted, unshaven, and utterly undone. He also looked, for the first time, like the boy in the painting. She stirred, and he snapped awake instantly. His gray eyes, red-rimmed and wild with relief, met hers. He reached for her hand with a desperation that startled her. "You're awake. Thank God, you're awake." She tried to speak, but her throat was dry. Lifted a cup of water to her lips, his hand unsteady. She drank, then sank back against the pillows, studying his face. There was something different in it, something broken open. "You stayed," she whispered. His jaw tightened. He reached into his pocket and drew out the silver locket, holding it up so she could see. Her breath caught. "I found this," he said, his voice thick. "And I remembered." Tears welled in her eyes, hot and sudden. You remember. Silver Lake, the forget-me-nots, the promise." He pressed the locket into her palm, closing her fingers around it. "I remember everything. The boy who gave you this, he was me, and I forgot. I buried him so deep I could not find him for 10 years. A tear slipped down her cheek. "I waited. I thought if I could just be near you, you might see me." He shut his eyes, and his face contorted with a guilt so deep it looked like physical pain. "I saw nothing. I am a fool. A cold, blind fool. You came to me carrying all that hope, and I gave you nothing but silence." He opened his eyes and looked at her with an intensity that stole her breath. "Can you ever forgive me?" She gazed at him, this man she had loved since childhood, this man who had broken her heart without ever meaning to. She saw the cracks in his armor, the raw, terrified hope in his eyes. "I forgave you years ago," she said softly. "I only ever wanted you to remember." He lifted her hand and pressed his lips to her fingers, his breath warm and unsteady. "I love you," he said, the words rough as gravel. "I think I have loved you since that summer, but I was too lost to know it. I love you, Seraphine. I love you too late, but I love you with everything I have." She reached up and touched his face, her thumb brushing the sharp line of his cheekbone. He leaned into her hand like a starving man offered bread. "It is not too late," she whispered. "We are both still here." He kissed her then, a kiss that was half desperation and half reverence, a kiss that tasted of tears and 10 years of waiting. It was not elegant, it was not practiced, it was real. And when he pulled back, he rested his forehead against hers and breathed as if he had just surfaced from deep water. "I will spend the rest of my life making you believe it," he said. "Every day, every hour, you will never wonder again." She smiled, weak and trembling, and the locket pressed warm against her heart. "I already believe you, Lake Boy." The weeks that followed were a slow, tender healing. He did not return to his cold ledgers and distant silences. He ate breakfast with her every morning, learning the small things, how she liked her tea, the way she hummed when she was thinking, the stories behind the faded scars on her hands. He told her about his parents, the accident, the years of loneliness he had never shared with anyone. She listened, and she did not look away. They walked together in the gardens, his hand never leaving hers. He showed her the portrait in the gallery and stood beside her. his voice raw as he described the boy he had been. She kissed his cheek and told him that boy was still there, older and a little wounded, but still hers. The staff noticed the change. Mrs. Pemberton confided to the butler that she had never seen the master smile so often. Mr. Hale, after a brief, awkward conversation, transferred to a northern estate, and the Duke found he could not summon a single shred of regret. In the spring they returned to Silver Lake. The water sparkled under a gentle sun just as it had a lifetime ago. Wildflowers dotted the shore, forget-me-nots scattered like tiny pieces of sky. She wore a simple dress of pale blue, and he wore an open collar, the breeze ruffling his hair. They stood at the edge of the lake, where the stone bench still sat, and he turned to her with something glowing in his eyes. "I made you a promise here," he said. "I want to make it again." He reached into his pocket and drew out a new locket, this one of gold, with a small sapphire at its center. Inside, she later discovered, was a pressed forget-me-not from that very shore. He fastened it around her neck, his fingers brushing her skin with infinite gentleness. Then he cupped her face in his hands and spoke the words that had waited a decade to be said aloud. "I will love you every day, little star. No matter what happens, I will never forget again." She laughed, a sound bright with tears, and threw her arms around his neck. The lake water lapped at the shore, patient and eternal. The ghosts of the past seemed to loosen their hold, drifting away on the warm spring wind. She was home. He was home. And the promise, finally, was kept. In the years that followed, the people of Ashford would often speak of their Duke and Duchess. They would tell stories of a love that seemed to deepen with each passing season, of a man who had once been cold as winter, and a woman whose quiet devotion had called him back to life, of two children who came laughing into the world, dark-haired and gray-eyed, who played by Silver Lake while their parents watched from the shore. And if you walked through the portrait gallery late at night, you might see a new painting hanging near the window. A man and a woman standing together under a summer sky, a silver locket gleaming at her throat. Their hands were intertwined, their smiles were soft, and the inscription beneath read, "He remembered."